Hello and welcome. I'm Jon, and delighted for this Everyday Mindfulness interview to welcome Clare Dudeney, the artist. Lovely to have you here today, Clare.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, I can't speak highly enough of Clare's art. I should say I came across your name. I think you know this already, Clare. I was reading a wonderful book by John Higgs about William Blake versus the world. And your name just kind of popped up. And then I did the obvious thing and sort of Googled your work. And yeah, I don't connect with much visual art. I don't really have that kind of connection with much art, but I really connected with your stuff. So I thought I must speak to this person. I must interview this person. So really delighted to have you along here today, Clare. And what I was going to start with was there's a story about your cat bringing in a dead starling when you were a child. I thought it was a good place to start. And this, apparently, most kids would probably run in absolute horror, but from what I can gather, you found the whole thing very beautiful, and you felt an urge to draw this dead starling over and over again. I just wondered, was that the moment when you thought, oh, I'm going to be an artist, or did it simply plant a small seed?
Yeah, it's amazing that you got that story. It's been a long time since I've spoken about that. But yeah, it did really kind of plant a seed for me. And I think I had just seen such a beautiful life form and wanted to kind of cherish it in some way, and kind of that was respectful and noticing all of the small intricacies of its its form and its colors and its sort of feathers and things. So yeah, I just kept on going back and back to it, and sort of building it into my memory and into the work that I made, going forward. But yeah, I think it was something about sort of cherishing life that had really appealed to me when the cat brought it in. But
How old were you when this starling arrived?
I was probably about 15, so I wasn't that
okay.
Young. So I was doing my A levels.
Okay, I somehow imagined it to be. Really, I imagined you were 4 years old or something. So that kind of makes it even more interesting in a way. What really intrigues me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you only became a full-time artist in 2014. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So what I'm interested in for my next question is from the time you were 15 to 2014. I'm not going to do the maths on that, but were you working as an artist? Did you consider yourself an artist? Or I know you went off and you worked on climate change and energy policy. You kind of went off and did all that stuff and then became an artist. What I'm saying is, did the artist thing was it birthed in 2014, or was there a sort of big build up to that? Were you doing art part-time? What's the story?
No, not at all, actually. So I basically, I'd always been really torn as a child between art and science, because I was interested in both, and I think they're very interlinked because they're about curiosity and asking questions. And so I think I found it difficult to decide what to do at university, and I ended up in my first year doing art, physics and geography, which was a really random combination. But I couldn't kind of continue doing the art into my degree, so I specialized, as you said, in environmental policy, and then went into a career in that direction, hoping that I would be able to continue art on the side. But actually, to be an artist is kind of quite all-consuming, and so it didn't happen, and I wasn't doing art on the side. I was sketching occasionally, but very, very rarely. And then I had a major change in career. I'd basically went on a trip to Antarctica, which was something I'd wanted to do my whole life because my dad works in Antarctica, and it was so it's just such an incredible landscape and feeling of being there, just feeling so alive in every moment, that I thought, what, why am I wasting my time in an office? And I went back and I literally sort of quit my job straight away. And it was over Christmas I'd gone, and I sort of 1st of January, I was like, right, that's it. And I wrote a list of all the things I'd ever wanted to do, and just started to try and do them, and just gradually, drawing was something that I realized that I loved, but I wasn't doing. And so I just started doing it every day and just doing a little bit and letting it build up incrementally. So no, I hadn't been drawing since I was 15, and it was a real sadness to have left something behind that had been so special. So I feel really grateful that it's a big part of my life again now.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a feeling that's not too uncommon. This sense of being an artist, but kind of life takes over. It takes you down another road, and then you kind of come back to your calling, perhaps, or another calling in that sense, because it sounds like your job itself up to 2014 was also a kind of calling.
Yeah, definitely. And I really enjoyed the climate change work, and I still do it. And so I'm quite grateful to still have those two aspects of work, kind of freelance portfolio. But yeah, I think I also felt like, in terms of mindfulness, that I was so busy doing, all the time in a job where you're just sort of like busy all day, and then you're so tired in the evenings that you end up just trying to sort of, distract yourself with other things like telly and stuff. And that, I think that experience in Antarctica had just been such like an unusual sort of sense of presence that I hadn't had before, that I'd wanted to then continue to have that sense of presence in my everyday life. And art also helps you have that feeling of just of being very present.
Well, I was going to say, I've never been to Antarctica, would love to go, but I've read a lot about it, and what the words that spring to mind, what I've taken from those readings, and whenever I see Antarctica as an image, is stillness, space, and an extraordinary silence.
Yeah, and that, I guess, and it definitely has those aspects. I think I was just kind of astounded when you're looking out on a landscape and you're just like, there's no people here, and I arrived, because I was sort of one of the crew. I sometimes arrived on an island like before anybody else had got there, and so the wildlife that was there probably may not have ever seen a human before, and so it was a really special experience to be kind of encountering nature in that way. And there were moments where you experience a sense of silence, although you still hear your breath and stuff, but there was also lots of just unexpected noises, like lots of kind of crackling and scraping of ice and avalanches in the distance. And so there was a really interesting soundscape there. And then also just watching the wildlife, they do things that you don't realize, like, so for example, penguins walk in each other's footsteps, so they make all these little highways everywhere that you're not to step on, but you don't sort of necessarily know that until you go there and see it, and you're told not to step on their highways.
Oh, really? Okay. I just wondered where when you started meditating, when was your first ever meditation?
Oh, when was my first ever meditation? That's interesting. I think probably it was like a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it was quite recent, and I think I've just been sort of going on maybe it was about 4 years ago. I remember that my friend had got repetitive strain injury, and so she was looking at ways to deal with that, and had suggested that we go on a mindfulness course together, which did really help with her injury. But so I think that was probably the first time that I tried it, and to be honest, I didn't take to it very well.
No, that's not uncommon either.
Yeah. So I was like, what is the point in this? I'm not enjoying it, and I felt like I was a really bad student, because I always felt like I fell asleep every time I listened to the tapes and stuff. But I think it's probably 2 years ago that I sort of started to do it more seriously, as in like that I tried to make it a practice, or felt that was helpful. And the art sort of helped me to see how busy my mental space was. And I think we never really, I mean, hopefully children do more nowadays, but we don't really get taught how to use our mental space. And so part of the artistic journey that I had was trying to understand, you know, what it is to live in a mind and body, and, you know, what it's like to experience thoughts and feelings and emotions, and how you could express just that, you know, just the sort of landscape of it rather than the content of it. You know, what you know, the art is not about what I'm thinking, it's about the fact that a thought's come and then it's gone and then another one's flashed in, or, you know, so that's what I was trying to explore.
I'm really interested in this from a number of angles. I know a few artists myself, and as you say, being an artist, creating art can be all-consuming. So I know artists who are fabulous artists who still struggle with the art of living with any sense of ease, because there's a sort of drive, there's a way of looking at the world which doesn't always lend itself to stillness and contentedness. Also, you're an artist who likes to step outside your comfort zone. We'll see some of your work, I believe, in a few minutes. But you know, some of your work is vast. It's, you know, incredibly ambitious. So that's kind of, there's an interesting tension there, I imagine, between that sort of, that sense of going beyond, like really stretching yourself, and the mindful idea of stillness and being at ease and simply kind of observing your thoughts and your feelings. So yeah, I'll stop at two angles. I've got probably quite a few I could name, but it just seems to me to be, as soon as I looked at your art, even before I discovered that you meditated, I just thought, well, I want to interview this person about her art, but also the meditative qualities that I saw in the art. So you can answer this, you know, as you like, but the relationship, I guess, between mindfulness and your art, and also your life.
Yeah, so I mean, I think art really is a confrontation with yourself and your mental space. So part of the process of becoming an artist, you then come up against all of these mental barriers, all these voices in your head saying, oh, it's not good enough, or, you know, all those barriers of like, you might want to try a new technique, but you feel scared for some reason, and you're like, why am I scared? It's just putting some paint on a canvas. But right. there's so many different aspects to sort of the making of art that link to your own insecurities and your own sort of spaces. So part of what I was really what I've always been quite interested in is like sort of pushing those boundaries in yourself, and being okay with the discomfort, or just noticing and, you know, just being present with it. But yeah, I think they're so interrelated. For me, the kind of mindfulness and the art, they're both about sort of just being present with what is. And yeah, I'm just trying to think about the pushing the boundaries. I mean, one of the things that I'd really been wanting to do for a while was to be kind of free, mentally free. And I was like, right, I need to break all these boundaries, and, you know, and sort of like everything that I'm afraid of, I need to sort of address it so that I can be really free. And it was sort of this sort of strange approach that I'd sort of taken. And then I met this other artist, and we had a really fascinating conversation where he was talking about how he has a really constrained process. You know, it's you know, he's like just like 3 colors, and he works in a very particular way, but within the boundaries of that he finds infinite freedom. And so I found this, it was quite the conversation that we had about that really kind of transformed the way that I saw, you know, how you achieve sort of freedom within yourself. And sometimes actually, like in art, like having being able to do anything you want and any choice, and it's overwhelming. And so like having a kind of process, and for me like an everyday process, means that you can within that process be very free to create and to explore. And so that's and it's similar to mindfulness and meditation in that everydayness, you know. And yeah, so sort of an everyday practice, as it were, and I do that for both. Yeah.
So when I've heard you talk about your work on videos and in sort of printed interviews, I'm suddenly reminded of Brian Eno from time to time. I wondered whether Eno had been an influence on you. And he talks a lot about process. He talks about sometimes the process of simply starting something in motion without having any clue whatsoever where it's going to go. That's a very Eno-esque concept, isn't it? I just wondered whether Eno had informed your work in any way.
He hadn't, but like, so people have said this to me before, and I'm trying to think whether did he do something where he like had strategies to sort of so each day like he would kind of challenge himself in some way to do something a bit different. Yeah, I did actually do that for a while, so yes, you're right.
Yeah, he had these strategic cards. He made them initially for musicians. So some of his most famous works, like his work with David Bowie on Heroes, for example, the Heroes album, they each chose a card at the beginning of the day, but neither knew what the other's card was. And so sometimes there were complete contradictions. Brian's card might say go slower, and David's card would say go faster. And I think, I may be wrong, but I think this explains a lot about the strange tension that's on that whole album. I just find it really interesting. But I thought I'd throw Eno in there. I never need an excuse to mention Eno. But just in terms of, we'll come to your work in a minute. I wanted to ask you about Bright Spot, which I think was the work that you was shown. It was a group exhibition entitled Mindfulness. When did that happen?
That was earlier this year, I think. Sorry, my brain is terrible. I think it's maybe May this year. I'm not sure.
It's the COVID thing. It's like we had 18 months of madness.
It's like this kind of big blur.
We don't know which year it is. I'm the same. So I found that interesting. So you were invited to contribute a piece to this mindfulness. What was it about that work, do you think, that made it appropriate for a mindfulness art exhibition? What made it kind of chime with the theme of the exhibition?
Shall I put it up on the screen?
Please do.
People can see the work. There we go. So that's the weaving. I think for me the process of weaving itself is a process of being mindful and meditative. So when I enter doing a weaving, I don't have any preconceptions about what it will be. I also don't I kind of integrate a lot of self-compassion and other sort of Buddhist teachings in terms of non-judgment and letting things be. So, you know, I try not to judge the works based on, do I like them, do I not like them, do they do this, do they do that? I just let them happen and let them reflect whatever is going on in that moment. So for a weaving, it's quite a constrained process. It's a grid, you know, so you've got your warp in one direction and then the weft that I'm putting through. And I've always wanted them to feel organic, because a lot of woven works are quite reflect that grid, you know, and I want them to feel like they're just sort of swirling and moving like watercolors. So when you're actually in that process, there's only really one decision that you're making at any moment, which is, will I change color? So you're just twisting two colors together and then you pull them kind of back and forth to decide where they go. So it's really very much being, you know, with one thing in one present moment. And so that's kind of, and it does take, for me anyway, it does take me into a kind of state of flow, so that I do, you know, sort of, obviously I'll still be having thoughts and stuff, but I will be in a kind of a different zone or way of being than maybe I am in other times of my life. And I try to make the changes that are made in the weaving just very gently reflect what's happening in my mental space. So I don't force it in any way or kind of go, right, this is going to be this kind of weaving. I just let it evolve. And so, you know, it might be that right there at the beginning, so at the top would be the beginning of that work. You know, I clearly was like, there was a much more subtlety going on, and I was quite patient and subtle. But then at some stage during the work, I wanted more drama or felt I needed something more. And then the brighter colours started coming in, and the kind of and the changes and the depth. And another thing with the weaving is you can't actually see the whole thing. You can only ever see about this much of it. So it's a leap of faith to sort of just be in it and not like worry about what it's going to look like in the end. Just let it emerge. It's
really interesting that as you're explaining all that, which is fascinating to me from the point of view of the artist, from my point of view as a viewer, I found looking at that piece of art incredibly meditative. I mean, it was like most of us sit and meditate, and the first thing we do is we close our eyes. And as a teacher, I'm always reminding myself we don't have to do that. But just looking at that beautiful piece of artwork, immediately I just felt a stillness and a descend. It was really interesting, just like what was going on there, the dynamic, listening to you talk about the piece of art as an art from the perspective of the artist, and then as a viewer having a meditative experience over a piece that was part of a mindfulness exhibition. I find that quite fascinating. Lots of different dynamics going on there.
Well, I think there's also, let me show you some other, I'll just show you another thing, which is, so the when I started weaving, so you can see, so this is an early weaving, but you can see how much busier it is, you know. So I felt one of the reasons that I wanted to learn to weave, because I felt that I was very impatient and that I just had a short attention span. And you can see some of that short attention span in the work there, because everything's changing very quickly. There's lots of bright colors, it's all contrasty. And so making that transition, I mean, this was prior to doing meditation more regularly. And so when I saw the works that were much more busy like this, I thought, actually, that's quite a fair reflection of my mental space, that things are just changing all the time. How can I make these works, how can these works be more quiet? How can they be more contemplative? And then I thought the only way to do that is actually to change my, you know, my brain and to be that myself. And so, you know, that sort of evolved into probably these sort of in-between works where I started to, you know, to be a bit more quiet. And then this work here, this red work, was one of the first ones that I did where I felt, actually, this is starting to reflect. This is just after I started to do transcendental meditation, and I was like, this is starting to reflect that kind of space that you can go into where you're sort of noticing that for moments you're not having thoughts, and you know that they're sort of bubble up, but you don't have to hold on to them. And so yeah, that's kind of part of the journey, that the weavings have shown that transition from like the early ones, which had all the activity into some of the later ones that are much quieter.
I find that really fascinating. It's almost like an artistic equivalent of those studies they do of people at various stages. They'll do a brain scan of somebody who's been meditating for a week and then a year, and then they'll do like a monk who's been doing it for 60 years. What you're describing is very much like an art version of that. It's really fascinating to see those changes. There was one piece I was going to mention, I'm not sure if you got it to hand, called Catastrophe.
Okay, yeah, let me see.
Which you produced, I believe, for your MA degree show.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether these are your words or whether this was said about the work. Maybe you can clarify this, but what I've got written down is it symbolized the pressure that you can put yourself under and how anxieties can be reflected in the work. I don't know whether they were your words or...
I don't know, but
it sounds like they could have come from you, right?
But yeah, that is definitely right. I mean, this was like for my degree show when I did my MA, and it felt, being in it, like an absolute nightmare. And I this was probably the peak of me feeling like my brain was just all over the place. It totally reflects it. But it wasn't comfortable. I didn't find it comfortable to be with or look at or share. But I did.
Well, I think it's amazing, but it's in stark contrast, isn't it, in terms of the mood and the makeup of it to your more recent stuff. You can almost feel the tension in there. There's a lot. I mean, you're finishing your degree, right? So there's going to be a lot of anxiety. Your head is going to be very busy. Would you say that's a fair description of your state of mind at the time?
Oh yeah, definitely. And you kind of put yourself under all these, what are really unnecessary pressures, but you sort of, like, for me, certainly scale, like I love the idea of sort of pushing myself and just going for something. And with this particular show, I'd been working on this, and then they had this entrance hall where there was a really big space, and I was like, no one's using this space. I don't suppose it's possible to do a work in it. And the head of the department was like, yeah, oh, maybe. And then I sort of showed him it, and it was sort of 10 meters by 5 meters, and he was like, oh, this excites me and scares me, and I need the weekend to think about it. And then I think I had about 2 weeks to make this work. I mean, I'll see if I can find it. This work.
Wow.
So but I couldn't have made that work if I hadn't have made Catastrophe. And that's what I think is so important about art and in life, is you have to go through some difficult stuff, some stuff that gives you a headache and sleepless nights, in order to make something that you feel actually gets you where you wanted to be. And for this work, I felt being in the presence of it was a really interesting experience. And to make it was really exciting, because it was so big that I couldn't see what it was going to look like. So I didn't know what it would look like until it was being hung. And so it was I quite like that, the not knowing aspect of it, and that the art has its own life, and it is its own thing. It's not mine, it's not me. It's sort of, you put it out in the world, and then everyone else will have their own relationship and meaning, with it. And so it's never just kind of the artist's vision. It's always kind of a collaborative thing.
I wouldn't assume you're the kind of person who believe, I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that you're not the kind of person who believes that an artist has to be a tormented artist. I just finished reading an amazing book, which you may or may not have read, which was recommended by a friend of mine, called Francis Bacon in Your Blood, which is just an extraordinary book. He's one of the painters I've always gravitated towards, and also recoiled from, as you can imagine. But the hell he had to put himself through to get into, I mean, he would go on these enormous benders, 24-hour drinking sprees with his Soho crowd, and then paint on The Hangover, which must have been just unimaginably excruciating, that he needed to kind of be in that state of torment to actually produce what he produced. And of course, the torment is all up there on the canvas. I just wondered what you thought of all that, about, or maybe what you've learned from that about, because most of the artists I've not met a lot, but as I say, they don't normally strike me as the kind of people who have an easy life. They don't go in and paint and then, down tools and, happy-go-lucky. It's a certain amount of torment and angst and neurosis tends to go with the territory. But I wonder what you thought about all that, the myth of the tormented artist, if you like.
I think that's really interesting, and yeah, and I can see how some artists, you know, kind of feel that they want to reach certain like states that help them to be more creative, more bold. And I think, I mean, I feel quite grateful to have kind of found things like meditation and mindfulness and yoga and things like that that are an alternative way to sort of be with what is happening inside you rather than escaping it through other means, which I imagine some of the artists were trying to do. But as I said earlier, I mean, art is really a confrontation with yourself. So you can't hide as an artist from what's going on inside you. It will come out. So like if you're upset about something, you know, you're having some issues, whatever you're making, it's gonna have it screaming out at you, and you're going to see it like a mirror, and you'll see it in your work, and you'll be like, ah. And so it's kind of that's what I found so helpful about things like, you know, self-compassion and just sort of saying, you know, like I'm accepting myself as I am, I'm accepting the work as it is what it is. You know, you have days when you feel really emotional, and that's okay, and it's okay to feel things, and it's okay for them to be in the work. And I think maybe I have a different attitude. I was chatting with someone the other day who's really very focused on the outputs of the work and whether people like it or not, and I kind of have moved away from that. It's not really about that. I'm just trying to like make a true reflection of what is going on, you know, for me, and like it, at a kind of level, like at a sort of deeper level, where it's not about my personal story or my narrative, but like what it is just to be a person and to be with those kind of emotions and stuff, in the hope that that will resonate with someone else and they'll feel that, you know, that sort of openness deeply themselves. But I don't sort of, you know, I try not to judge the work too much, you know, and I tend to make it in a big series such that it will, you'll see within the series all the variation of everyday life, you know.
I just wondered how, how much difference, if any, meditation had made to your productivity. You know, do you find it, are you painting more? Do you find it easier to paint for long stretches? Because we've talked a little bit about how meditation is there in the work. I just wondered about the actual act of painting itself.
I don't know about that. Like, I don't know whether it sort of contributes to the productivity side. I think it's more just, well, one of the things it does help with, I suppose, is helping me transition between, you know, like sort of, I do also do consultancy work, and, you know, there is a certain, you know, you can get in a certain mindset, like a way of using your brain, which is about problem solving and talking to people and doing and this and that, and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And so I guess meditation is quite helpful for helping me shift to a mental space that is about curiosity and noticing, and like not, I mean, I'm always so intrigued by seeing simple objects as like extraordinary, you know, like any object that you could find, like you can look at it anew as not something that's familiar, but something that has, you know, an intriguing texture or color or feel or movement or light on it. And that is like when you're starting to see it as an artist, and it's just really different from you being like, okay, that's an apple. You know.
Yes.
That's yeah, like part of, I think mindfulness and meditation helps with that, like kind of like not letting all the thoughts distract you from just being kind of able to notice things.
Yeah, because I expect also, you know, being an artist entails being an artist in a commercial world, dealing with agents and galleries and expectations and good reviews and bad reviews and the full catastrophe of all that, you know. And so I would imagine that I can only imagine, but if I was an artist, and you're obviously you're a painter, you're a printmaker, you're a woodcarver, you're a weaver, you do it all. you know, you're like the Renaissance woman. I just wondered whether mindfulness can be helpful in terms of, that's all white noise, isn't it? Like, or it can become white noise, the whole thing of expectation. I know from my work as a journalist, it's like when you sit down to write a piece, just write it. But if you've got, what's my editor want? What does my reader want? You know, when am I going to get paid for this? All that stuff is just, they can be obstacles in the way of actually just getting the bloody job done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those, like, you know, like meditation, mindfulness, and those sorts of practices help you to feel more like, or help me to feel anyway, more kind of secure in myself and less like needing of the, you know, approval of others, you know, and just being like, I'm okay. Like, you know, I might do things that are silly and I'm going to forgive myself for that. I might, you know, but I kind of feel quite contented in who I am, accepting of who I am. And sort of I had a period where I did a lot of dream journals where I sort of looked at all my dreams, and so I had a period of kind of looking at the narrative side and then just accepting a lot of the stuff that was bothering me. And so I think that it can be really helpful for like giving you that kind of security, so that you're not then looking for approval, or you're not being too swayed by, you know, a curator saying, well, I like this bit of work. And it happens all the time. They'll say, oh, but we really like those kind of works. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm kind of doing something new now. And so you just have to do it and be like, well, these are the new things I'm doing now. Oh, that's great. Because so people are a bit, you know, they can be a bit afraid that the new won't be as good, but they haven't seen the new yet. They don't know what it's going to look like. So you just have to kind of take a risk. But I really do try not, I mean, it's obviously hard. You do care what other people think, and if somebody comes in and says something, you know, like unkind, I mean, I'm really protective of my weavings. If someone says something really unkind about my weavings, I'd feel really sad for them.
Of course,
but you know, like I don't, you know, I try not to get too focused on that. And I do think it's very hard nowadays. I think people, you know, with social media and stuff, really there is much more focus on presenting a, you know, an outward idea of yourself, which isn't really you, and getting other people to buy into it. And I think I don't like, I don't really want to do that. I think it sometimes it can feel that way because you are putting your pictures and stuff up, but I try not to let it affect me too much, or at least I notice if I'm like looking at Instagram too much, I'm like, what are you doing here? You know.
One of the things I find particularly interesting about you, one of many things, and this obviously links to the Blake book. So when Jon Higgs, were you aware that you were interviewed by Jon, weren't you? So you knew it was going to be a part of the book. He lives in Brighton. I think he's an extraordinary thinker and a brilliant writer, and he's funny as well, which always helps. So we're coming to the subject of hyperphantasia.
Oh yes.
Okay, so not many people will know. I'd never heard the word, although I was kind of familiar with the concept for some reason. And this is an area that I've always been fascinated in, because it's really an area about it's about how we perceive the world, right? So I'm going to leave it to you, if you don't mind, to, in a nutshell, explain what hyperphantasia actually is.
Yeah, sure. So because I'd always, you just assume that you all see the world in the same way, and of course we don't, you know. And so hyperphantasia, and well, it started actually with aphantasia. So some research at Exeter University by Professor Adam Zearman, and he was looking at somebody who had no ability to make mental images in them, you know, basically to bring up images in their mind. And so they were looking at why this is and studying it, doing kind of MRI, fMRI scans. And so, they've realized that there's a spectrum of seeing that runs from people that can't bring up mental images in their mind to people that can see almost like as clear as day in their mental space. and so yes, and I'm more on that end of the spectrum, and took part in this study with Adam, and had the brain scan and those sorts of things, which was a really fascinating experience. And we also took part in an exhibition, and the way I'd kind of got in touch with them was through a friend who is aphantasic, and he's an artist, but he can't bring up an image of his mum in his mind. He can say that she's got red hair, but he can't see her.
Right.
He almost uses his canvas as his visual memory, like as his way of seeing. So he'll kind of construct things on it and be like, oh, does that look like a leg or not? Is it a bit wonky? And, you know, work that way. Whereas I was at that time making drawings from my dreams, where I would just wake up each morning and just draw all the images that I'd seen in sleep. And so
Right.
we then kind of got into that dialogue about what you see inside your mind, and how clear it is, and other people in the group that we were discussing the dreams with, you know, had other experiences. So for example, one of my friends sort of dreamed with textures, like, so she dreamed sort of like, she had this recurring dream about that feeling of skin on gravel, which is horrible.
Yeah.
But like, you know, she just, these interesting kind of like different ways of feeling in that dream space, which was quite fascinating. Yeah. So
one thing I read you say, and I don't know where this comes from or when you said it, it must have been maybe an early interview about this subject, was that you, or it may have been in the John Higgs book, where you're on a train ride and you're reading a book, and there's a description in the book about a nail going into a foot, and you passed out on the train, right?
yeah.
So that gave me that gives me an inkling as to where we are with this. Would you say that, I hesitate to say that nails it, but do you, I didn't mean to do that, it just popped out. Is that the best way of encapsulating what you're gifted with? Because I'm very wary about calling this a condition, because a condition makes it sound like you're suffering from it.
Oh yeah, it's a condition.
This sounds to me like a real gift.
Well, I think it is. I mean, it's just a different way of seeing, really, and it's the only way I know. And also, it's hard to really compare like how any of us see, because none of us is ever going to know what it's like to be in each other's minds. So it's kind of one of those things that's difficult. But no, I mean, I do feel grateful to be able to create those sorts of mental images. And in that case, I think that was a combination, really, but now in hindsight, of having had an early experience of that, so that it triggered, you know, that reading of not a nail, but I had an injection experience that was triggered by it. So it was in part my overactive visual imagination, and it was in part it triggering a kind of previous childhood trauma that I've now looked at. So but yeah, I mean, I do feel it's really interesting to be able to explore the imagery that you make in your mind, because it's quite freed from like the conventions of real life, which is quite interesting.
But let me ask you this: are there times when it's difficult to tell the difference between something that you're imagining and something you're perceiving? How thin is that line?
Yeah, I definitely think, well, certainly with dreams, I think it can be like, you know, I can wake up and be like, did that really, you know, did it really happen? You can't quite work out whether it's something you've seen in reality or you've imagined it. And also, I mean, I'm just constantly fascinated by our capacity to notice things without realizing it. I mean, there was one thing where I was talking with someone, and I was talking about the dream that I'd had, and the dream had been about sort of somebody taking, it was a long story, but it was basically about getting a thorn in my hand and somebody taking it out, and the guy was like, did you see the picture upstairs? And I was like, no, I didn't see it. And he was like, well, it was because I said I had been up there, and he said, well, it's a picture of that. It was a picture of the story of the lion who's where a thorn was taken out of his paw. And
Right.
it was just, I'm just really intrigued by how we can pick up so much subliminally and then create a whole narrative about it that our conscious mind hasn't even noticed that we've seen
Right.
something, but our subconscious has kind of made it into this new intriguing story, you know. And yeah, so I'm kind of fascinated by by that.
I think yeah, it was Adam who said, is it Adam Zeman? Zeman?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said maybe it's a bit harder to live in the present if you have very vivid visual imagery. So I'm speaking to somebody who has very vivid visual imagery, but who also practices mindfulness. I'm really intrigued by this. Like, I can understand what Adam's getting at there, which is if you're seeing things and imagining things that intensely, how that would affect one's ability to be literally with what's in front of one's eyes, one's breath. So how does that work for you?
It's really true. I haven't really thought about it much before you say this, but it's very true that I always felt much more comfortable in memories and in future visioning than in the present. And I find now that I can get really overwhelmed by visual stimulus, probably because I'm taking in a lot. And
Yeah.
So for example, when I go to an exhibition, I'll often get, if it's, you know, one of those long ones at the Tate or something, or I'll often get like overwhelmed by room one, and I'll realize I'm just trying to dash through it all because I just can't cope with the amount of visual imagery that my brain's trying to take in.
Right.
But yeah, so I can see that that's true, that it can be quite difficult to be present. And I do sometimes find the closing your eyes, I certainly, whenever I meditate, I do close my eyes. I find it easier to kind of go in and without any any external stimulus.
Because I'm trying to imagine. So say if there's two people meditating in a room. Let's say you're meditating with a friend who doesn't have hyperphantasia, and you hear the sound of a cat. And we all know what it's like to meditate, and you hear the sound of a cat. So your friend hears the sound of the cat and thinks and visualizes the cat, just a black blob with whiskers, perhaps.
Mm.
I'm imagining that your imagining of that cat, what you bring to mind is going to be a much fuller picture. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Yeah,
I'm wondering how easy it is to get kind of, you hear the cat, is it a challenge for you to kind of go, you know, this cat's starting to really kind of fill my world right now?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, the thoughts, in the same way that thoughts come and go, yeah, the imagery would definitely do the same. And you know, likewise to the other book I meant, you know, when you mentioned about fainting on the train, when you talked about that, it reminded me of when I was at school and someone was reading Roald Dahl's Boy, and they were talking about the dental scene, and I was visualizing it really clearly, and then again fainted. So it's just these things where you can't help. When people are talking, for me, I can't help but bring up images of it. And
Yeah.
can be, I mean, you know, obviously it can be really nice sometimes, but other times, depending on what they're talking about, it can then trigger a reaction and be a bit unhelpful. But
I would imagine you avoid horror films. Is that a fair guess?
I did, but I've been trying recently to, so with the incident of the injection, I then did something called EMDR, what is it called? Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Oh yeah.
So I basically watched a doc go back and forth, and we revisited this moment to see if we could make it safe. And that was amazing experience. And now I can actually watch horror movies and stuff, but I still find it much harder if someone's talking about something, because as you say, the mental images that I create and the feeling that I create is much worse than if you're watching it on telly, because if you're watching it on telly, you kind of know it's not real.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any like recent artwork you could put up on the screen and explain it or describe it from a hyperphantasic, if that's the word, point of view? I don't know if that question makes any sense. Like how the hyperphantasia may have informed the work. Is that possible to do?
I can put up, I don't know. So, I mean, some previous artwork, I mean, the dreams work that I did, sorry, I'm just going to share the dreams work I did definitely was all about the the hyperphantasia. But I'm not sure that the work today, okay, wait a minute, I'll just see if I can find, there is one that that was a collage. Let me just see. Don't know whether it will be on because we didn't plan which works we were going to look at. I'll just see if it's on here. I'm not sure if it's going to be on here though. There is, yay. So yeah, this one was intriguing because when I went to Antarctica, I was like, I really want to make an all white painting to reflect Antarctica, the experience, because that's what you think, it's all like ice and it's all, and so then I was like, right, I'm going to make my Antarctica painting, and then all these colors came out and I was like, this is not the white painting I wanted. And then when my dad looked at it, and he does not like get into art at all, he's not an art person, he was like, that's Antarctica, isn't it? And I was like, how did you know that? And he was like, no, it's got all the colors of Antarctica. And so now I think with the hyperphantasia, it's more about trusting that I go out in the landscape and I look, and then I come back and I just mix colors, and that those colors that you've seen will occur, and that's the thing, that in Antarctica there's a lot of pinks that you don't realize there's going to be because of the penguin poo, and there's sort of certain lichens and things that bring those yellows out. So there's a lot of colors that I wasn't anticipating, I thought it was all white and ice, but actually they came out through my subconscious better than if I'd tried to, intentionally paint them.
It's really interesting that your father, who I think you said his work brought him regularly to that part of the world, that he instantly got it. I find that really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, and that for me, I was like, oh, okay, well, I've successfully made an Antarctic painting. If he gets it, that's good. Yeah.
How is your mindfulness practice these days? I mean, are you a regular meditator? Are you a bit on and off? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I try to do it regularly. I'm not as regular as I was. I think during the pandemic, I got really into it. So I did this course on transcendental meditation just before the first lockdown. And so I was doing it sort of every morning, every evening, and so it was a sort of 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, and sometimes doing other practices in between of self-compassion or body scans and things. I would say now, like I try to do it every day, but it's probably not always every day, but I don't do it twice a day at the moment. But I'm in Cornwall at the moment for 2 months, and part of what I've said that I'm going to do while I'm here is to really be much more mindful. So I've had, over the summer, I had a big project with my other work. I work for charity Sustainability First, and I do work on climate change and with art, and that's taken over a lot of time. So now is the time to sort of get back to the practice of art and the practice of meditation a bit more.
Yeah, and do you find it the more you practice, do you find it quite easy or difficult to be present in your everyday life? Because what I've noticed as a teacher is particularly when people, they come to a group once a week, but they haven't got to the point of meditating in their own time. And then they say to me, you know, I'm having difficulty folding this into my everyday life. So, you know, and I understand that, you know, it's like they attend the group or once or twice a week. It's the kind of not doing it at home. That's probably the next step they kind of need to make. But yeah, they find it hard to be present. So they're present while they're meditating with me on Zoom or in a face-to-face group. But between sessions, they haven't quite got to that point of being able to walk down a road, recognize that they're lost in their thoughts and coming back to their breath, or the sensation of footsteps on the pavement or whatever. And of course, that's kind of the point that we're kind of going for, isn't it? That's, you know, to fold it into our lives so that not that every moment becomes a mindful moment, but that we recognize every moment as an invitation to be mindful. So I wondered how that worked for you. Like, are you managing to be quite present in your life these days?
Well, at the moment, I think I am. I think over the summer, I was so busy with work that it kind of was a bit more, you know, all consuming again. I find, you know, like the thing is, it's only 15-20 minutes. You don't even need to do that, actually. Like, it could be
Right.
5 minutes. So we do all have time. And I think there's other reasons why you don't always do it. And like, I do find sometimes when you're in that quite distracted mode of like you're checking your emails every 5 minutes or you're trying to remember a lot of things, it's quite hard to say, no, actually, you know what, I do need to take a bit of time and just get into a good mental space.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's probably not good, but the lockdown approach that I had was extremely geeky. I had like a whole checklist of how I wanted to live each day, which was like, you know, which is like had meditation, two different types of meditation, and I did a forgiveness practice and a gratitude practice, and so I would just tick it off each day.
Right.
Probably a bit outcome focused, but that was how I managed, because I just was like, I want to have, you know, I want to change the way I live, and the lockdown kind of gave an opportunity to sort of think about a better way to have each day, and so I found that quite helpful to create a new habit, you know.
Yeah.
But then it's been harder when work has been busy to maintain those habits that I found really helpful. And as I said, part of what I would like to do here is to kind of get back into all those practices. But yeah, and I mean,
sort of the difference between intentions and goals, isn't it? I mean, you know, we sort of describe mindfulness as a goal-less practice, and it is, in a sense. We're not trying to get anywhere, but having the intention to meditate every day is pretty good. You know, having the intention that this meditation is, having the goal that this meditation is going to make me feel chilled out. Nice. That's what kind of gets in the way of feeling relaxed. You know, it's that striving again, isn't it? We can turn this into another form of striving if we're not careful.
That's it. And I guess I did turn it into a sort of tick box, you know, just because of the way I did it. But I didn't treat it as something that I had expectations of. I just wanted to try and make time for it each day. And I knew that myself, that if I didn't have some kind of form of remembering, you're supposed to be doing these things each day, I wouldn't remember it. But I mean, another thing that I did find helpful in lockdown was just to have like a silent day. And I did a couple of days of silence, which I sort of planned out in advance in a really geeky way, because I'm quite geeky with these things. So I planned out all my like half an hours and hours and what I was going to do. But then it was very kind of not relaxing, but in fact, it wasn't at all relaxing. It was just, you know, because actually mindfulness and meditation isn't really that relaxing. But it was really, you know, I found it a very helpful kind of practice. Certainly, like when I realized, because I went for a walk with somebody else. And usually if you go for a walk, you might be chatting the whole time. And you're not really noticing stuff.
Absolutely.
And I found that when I was on the walk and we were walking together, but we were walking in silence because I was doing this meditation, actually, I just, you know, it was such a richer experience, and like noticing so much, and, you know, trying to find other ways to sort of share that we'd seen something rather than speaking. And I found it just very helpful as well, that you have all these thoughts and you think they're really great and you should be sharing them with people, but actually you don't need to. And it's great just to let it go. And you know, that was like a really helpful experience to as well think about listening, and, you know, just being aware of other senses rather than just, you know, seeing and speaking, and which tend to be a bit more dominant.
Absolutely. Claire, I can't thank you enough. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. I'll be in touch, obviously, to you know, kind of top and tail, you know, details and things like that. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the feedback from our readers and listeners about your art and your story, which has just been fascinating. So thank you ever so much for your time.
No,
Great speaking with you. Have a great time there in Cornwall.
thank you.
I'll be in touch. Take care.
See ya.
All the best. Bye bye now.